I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's TGU time, the governance update from VLGA Connect, sponsored by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, where we look at the week's big local government news stories, not just in Victoria, but also beyond. And to help us do it, we have Nick Miller from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers and Julie Reid from Julie Reid and Associates. Hello, Nick.
Morning, Chris. Morning, Julie.
And hello, Julie.
Hello, Chris. Hi, Nick. Now, Nick, is this your last week with us?
It is my last week. And the rumour is that Tony is back in the country, but he's obviously not with us this morning. I think he still might have the jet lag. So,
yes.
But look, just on that topic, I should say I've had an absolute ball working with you both. Really enjoyed it, learned a lot, had a lot of fun. And I did want to pay a special tribute to Andrew Gunter, who has helped me bone up a little bit on my local government knowledge. And he's been a really tremendous help to me in getting me in the right headspace for these podcasts. So thank you, Andrew.
It's been terrific having you, Nick, and well done, Andrew, for the support behind the scenes there. But it's been great, but you're not done yet. You've got, a good 40 minutes or so to go. And coming up on today's show, we've got quite a bit to talk about. There's another monitor in place as of today at a Victorian council. There's a new CEO appointment interstate with a Victorian connection and a strong sporting connection as well. Lots of councils in the news in Melbourne for various reasons. We'll have a look at why that is the case. And this issue of incivil behaviour, abuse towards elected members and council staff rearing its head yet again. We'll tell you why a little bit later in the show. But let's start, Nick and Julie, just with a brief update on that issue we've talked about where the CFMEU is trying to take on local government staff as part of its union, and it's being resisted strongly by some councils led by Greater Geelong and the ASU. For an update, that matter is at the Fair Work Commission. There was a directions hearing on Wednesday. My mail is that's coming back to the Commission in September. The CFMEU is trying to get an order to be able to represent, I think it's just heavy plant operators at this stage at the City of Greater Geelong. So we're keeping an eye on that one. I'm not sure, Nick or Julie, if you've heard any more on that, but that's my understanding of the latest.
No, that's all. Thank you.
Very interesting to watch that one.
It will be. Yep. So we'll keep people informed, but we're not expecting anything more now until September by the sounds of it. The latest municipal monitor announcement from the Victorian government, Melissa Horne, the Minister for Local Government, has appointed Christine Ferguson as a municipal monitor at Colac Otway Shire, the usual thing to assist and support the council with governance processes and practices. Interesting thing here is the timing, I guess, this close to elections. The appointment, Julie, is through until the end of January, so it'll go through the election period. But this one's on the advice of the Chief Municipal Inspector, I see.
Yes. This one was a little bit different because of it coming from the Chief Municipal Inspector. But, that's, he might have some insight that that is obviously important for the Minister to know about. So, and interesting appointment as well. Christine Ferguson, accomplished executive or non-executive director with extensive experience in the Victorian public sector. She's currently, I believe, at 000 Victoria and has also held a range of senior roles at the Department of Energy, Environment and Climate Action. So a different kind of appointment that's coming through from the Minister. And interesting, like you said, right through until January. I would say that seems to have been a trend recently to try and get the councillors through that transition period into or post the election, which is probably not such a bad idea.
Well, and pending the election of a new, potentially some different councillors in the new group of councillors, and helping set them up for success is how I would put it. This is the fifth council, Nick and Julie, to have monitors in place right now. So that's probably a record, not counting the councils under administration, which will obviously cease come the elections in October.
Chris, that early time they're going to be deliberating or thinking about the code of conduct. They're going to be talking about the code of conduct, etc. So having the monitors in there when they're having those discussions around the code of conduct is going to be really, really important for the councils.
And you say interesting appointment here. I think we're starting to see the benefits of that process that LGV ran to build a panel of qualified people, and we're seeing some people with different perspectives, bringing a different lens, perhaps, not necessarily former mayors or council CEOs. So, I mean, that's got to be a good thing, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
All right, so there we go, another monitor in place. Now, talking about setting up for success, we've talked a lot about preparing people for the role of a councillor before they even put their hand up to be a candidate. And we know there's some changes in the reforms that have come through the Parliament very, very recently. I understand the candidate training, Nick, has been updated now for this coming election cycle.
Yes, that's right, Chris. And this is a prerequisite to nomination. That said, it is a relatively basic requirement. There's only 1 hour of online training required. The training is in things like conflicts of interest, the code of conduct that applies, and the support that councillors can obtain. Look, it's a good thing. I think it's good that anyone who's putting their hand up to be potentially elected has an awareness of those sorts of issues. It's by no means a full solution, and we've seen with the reform legislation that's come through that there's going to be more intensive councillor training and indeed mayoral training that follows on as implemented as part of that. It's all part of lifting the standards, lifting civility, but just part of the package.
Yeah, and Julie, there was a lot said, I guess, last time about that training perhaps being a bit superficial, not going far enough. Do you think this addresses some of those concerns?
Look, you're only going to be able to do so much in like an hour's training. So I think what goes on after they get elected is going to be really, really crucial.
Yes.
So I think as long as the key bits of information are provided to those potential candidates so they understand the role of the councillor, I think that's the most important thing. It's when they get elected that they need to engage in the training seriously.
A CEO appointment up in Queensland this week of note. Noosa Council has appointed Larry Sengstock as its ongoing CEO, effective in a couple of weeks' time. He's going to have a break, but he's been acting in the role since last year. Now, a friend of TGU, Steve Cooper, reminded me, and it was lost on me initially, that Larry is, of course, famous for another field of endeavour, a former Olympian basketballer and chief executive of Basketball Australia, which is part of the credentials that's led him to be, I think, a very successful consultant on sporting projects to councils around the country. Before becoming an executive, he was at Latrobe City at one point in a senior role, and now will be leading one of the most, I think, attractive places to be in Queensland, Noosa.
Yes, I would say that, Chris, and I've just been up there, and it's just such a beautiful spot. So, almost tempted myself, Chris.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Now, apparently there were 200 applications.
Wow.
They received for the role. So, and I think, living in an area like that is obviously quite an attraction. So I think he moved to Noosa in 2021, according to the reports, as Council's Infrastructure Services Director. So he's been there for a little while, and he's obviously, as you said, he was acting CEO. So he's obviously got the confidence of the council in a short period of time, which is fantastic. He comes with lots of credentials around, Master of Business Administration and Bachelor of Applied Science and Physical Education, etc. So he's well credentialed. And it seems as though he does have a keen interest in looking after people as well, which is good. So he's obviously a people type leader, and that comes through in the comments that were made from the council. So terrific appointment. We wish Larry well in his role.
And another example of I think a small number of people who've converted from one major high-profile career to another. Dale Dixon, who's of course leading a council in Melbourne now and was at the Gold Coast for a long time, former footballer. And we've got Larry, former basketballer, leading a Queensland council. It just shows you that those skills are clearly transferable.
And look, diversity of experience is always a wonderful thing. And I think that's something that has changed in local government in the last 5 years or so. People from diverse career backgrounds moving into, the senior executive roles. It's terrific.
All right, more councils in the news this week. Can we start with Yarra? There's a couple of Yarra stories that have made news. This one's getting a bit of mileage. Their new climate emergency plan. They've been kicking goals since declaring a climate emergency in terms of reducing emissions, I should say, and becoming carbon neutral. Julie, this plan's getting some attention from the media that perhaps the council wasn't anticipating, particularly around things like encouraging less consumption of meat. Those sorts of issues are getting lots of mileage.
Yes, it's interesting, Chris, because this is their second climate emergency plan, and they're focusing on 7 key areas. And it's interesting that they want to work closely with the community. So all of that seems to me to be quite reasonable. And remembering that in the Local Government Act, it does talk now about councils getting involved in climate change and mitigation around climate change. So it would seem as though Yarra are in the space of where they need to be and aligned with the Local Government Act. So that's good. So they're looking at embedding proactive climate responses in, with the community, and they're talking about prioritising support for community members at greater risk from climate impacts, which to me seems like it's quite reasonable. Building partnerships and empowering their community to advocate for stronger climate policies and targets, and looking at being equitable for the future. They're looking at net zero emissions by 2035. And delivering some innovative programs. So, some of these might attract some interest by the media, yes, but, let's have a look at what, sensibly they are considering. And also importantly, Chris, which I thought was really good there, they've made a commitment to collaborating with traditional owners as decision makers and partners in caring for country. So, particularly in relation to biodiversity and climate resilience. So there's a strong emphasis in there around that. Look, they want to ensure that people live comfortably in climate safe homes as well, supported by climate resilient public spaces. So, and they talk about the circular economy and supporting the community to consume less, repair, share and repurpose, and send less waste to landfill, which is music to all of our ears, I'm sure. So I think that whilst they're getting some interesting response from the media, I think that overall what they're trying to do seems to be pretty sensible and aligned with legislation, Chris.
Yeah, I think the plan actually talks about, recognising a number of people who are vegan and vegetarian and supporting those people and perhaps encouraging others to join them. I'm not sure it's quite as stark as the Herald Sun and Sky News have been saying. They've really gone to town on this angle, haven't they, Nick?
It's an absolute gift for those sorts of outlets. And they've referred to looking to traditional Aboriginal land management practices, which I haven't looked at the plan itself, but I suspect is probably overhyped somewhat. Of course, exactly how much that, at least as stated, could work in an urban and a dense urban area, of course, is up for debate. But that's the nature of media, and they pick the eyes out of what they want to say and go for it. So, look, as Julie says, there's a lot that's sensible here. Better design to reduce energy use, greater use of public transport. Those things make eminent sense.
Of course, it's since been revealed, since the first reports, that the council and the executive at their pre-dinner meeting on the evening they adopted this plan were served meat. So, that's given them another chance to have a whack. The council has said since they all confirmed that a plant-based menu is to be offered going forward in accordance with that plan. And I guess the argument is the plan hadn't been adopted before that dinner occurred, but maybe.
You're sounding like a lawyer there, Chris.
I was going to say maybe we could have seen that one coming though, because I think we knew what was in the plan, and when I say we, I mean the council. All right, let's leave that one there. I'm sure those media outlets will find some more to talk about on that. The flood modelling that has been done in Yarra and also at Maryback has also made news this week. Julie, this is not a uncommon process to be happening at councils, is it? Actually, I might start with Nick here, with your legal eye. Nick, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, it is an interesting one. It certainly generated quite a bit of a reaction. It's something that should be looked at. There's no doubt about that. And this is, perhaps step one in the process. Council officers did recommend that the building rules be changed and that the flood maps be changed. However, council has unanimously decided not to proceed with those recommendations and instead has deferred action until roughly 6 months' time, February, I think. Meanwhile, there'll be further investigation and reporting on the state of the drains, because this is about flooding from drains and impervious surfaces, not river flooding or coastal flooding, and what the cost of mitigation might be. And really, I think the council, in many ways, has been quite sensible in saying, well, we need more information before we make these changes, because they're going to have huge impacts on insurance coverage, on value of property, and indeed on the rates that people might pay. I mean, one of the sort of perverse things that might happen here, if this does eventuate such that 1/3 of the properties in the city of Yarra are subject to a change in the flood maps, that could have a value impact, which could have a rate impact. And of course, interestingly, the people who pay more rates will be those that are in the non-prone areas, those that are not affected, if that's where it comes to. Look, that raises a whole range of interesting issues. What happens if you buy something that's in a potentially flood-affected area in the next 6 months before the maps are changed? Will you then have an action against the council because the council, presented with information from the initial report, didn't proceed to implement that, and the council's not complied with the statutory obligation or been negligent in some way? Now, I'm not giving a definitive opinion on that, but it does raise those sorts of issues.
What is the answer?
It's but it's an interesting question. Really is.
Julie, as I said before, not an unusual process. In fact, a lot of councils are dealing with this very issue right now.
Yeah, they are. I'm seeing quite a bit of this work happening across the sector, particularly in those inner and middle ring suburbs where there's a lot of catch up in relation to this drainage space. They're working with authorities like Melbourne Water to anticipate, what change needs to be mapped and what needs to be reflected into the planning scheme. So, this is not unusual for this kind of work to occur. However, it is really controversial in the sense that you do need to engage your community to let them know what's going on and to talk to them about the implications of some of this sort of mapping exercise. But it did say in the report in the Age that Yarra has said that they've been consulting on it, and they've sent over 4,500 letters and newsletters and social media out to the community. So they are, defending the fact that they are undertaking consultation in this space. So look, it can be a really controversial and a really tricky issue. You've got to get it right, and it needs a lot of time. Usually these projects take a long time to come to fruition because of the large potential impacts that they're going to have.
And all the work that needs to be done.
That's right.
And the problem here is if the sort of a partial outcome or a partial report or an early report has been delivered and generated the reaction that it has, whereas it is, as Julie says, going to take some years to really get this right.
Yeah. It should be said, flood planning, flood modelling, it's a big issue in the regions as well. We had major floods not that long ago across large parts of the state. All of those councils are either at the pointy end or well in the midst of those similar processes at the moment.
Yeah, and we saw how that
mm,
affected Moira in
yeah,
the Commission of Inquiry report, where they talked about the flooding and the mitigation measures they had to put in place as a result. So,
yeah,
there's huge cost associated with the findings of these kinds of this kind of modelling, but it's a responsibility of councils to understand the impacts of flooding across their municipalities. It's really, really important.
spot on.
Mm.
Boroondara has taken the big step of going to the Supreme Court to try and to get what it would call fair compensation for the loss of tennis courts, in this case, public open space, as a result of Northeast Link. Big step to be taking, Julie.
Yes, it is. Boroondara have a tennis centre, or had a tennis centre that was 23 courts that were used by 45,000 people a year before it closed in 2022 for the road project. And we know that the road project has had some difficulties in the blowout of the amount of cost of that particular project, which has blown out, I think, to 26 billion. So the state government offered City of Boroondara 30 million, 30.1 million last year for the loss of their tennis facility. And the council have launched now a Supreme Court action against the Department of Transport and Planning, arguing that the 3.7 hectare site in Balwyn North was undervalued, and they're saying that they should be paid at least $64 million. So we're talking about, less than half. They've been offered less than half of what they believe is the value. So they're now going into battle, and they're hoping to get the full return on their asset that has, that will, and on a site like that, it's pretty hard to find another site at 3.7 hectares in Boroondara, but, certainly they're going to have to find an alternative for their community and, seeking better compensation. So it'd be an interesting case to see how they go, and what success they have.
Yes, we'll keep an eye on that one.
And one of the interesting things there, of course, is that as throughout eastern Melbourne, the site was an area of a creek floodplain area, which is amenable to sporting facilities such as we find throughout that part of Melbourne. And finding, now that that's been taken by the road project, as Julie says, finding something as a replacement for that is very difficult, and it's going to go to higher value. The land is inevitably going to be of higher value because it's usable for more functions. Now, there's lots of interesting things happening here, but ultimately these land compensation cases, they're about positioning as well. So let's recognise that as part of the game, dare I say it, that's going on.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, moving on, there's been a development in the Melbourne Airport rail link matter, which we've talked about a few times, particular interest to councils in Melbourne's West, Moonee Valley and Brimbank, particularly leading the charge there. I see Brimbank has reacted to the airport's change of heart on an above ground versus underground station. They're saying they'll compromise now on an above ground station. The early reports suggested this meant that the project could be back on track for a 2030 completion, but I see the Premier's put a bit of cold water on that because there's still some issues to be sorted out. But Brimbank Mayor Ranka Rasic has welcomed that change of heart from the airport and underscored the importance of this to particularly the Sunshine Precinct and that Sunshine Station super hub, which is going to deliver so many jobs and so much economic stimulus for the West, Julie.
Yeah, in actual fact, they're saying it's going to generate 30,000 new jobs, Chris, and attract more than 40,000 new residents to the west. So this is significant. And this is in Brimbank that they're quoting this. So, this is significant for places like Brimbank, and no doubt Moonee Valley will benefit as well. So, look, this is really good news because it's obviously been at a bit of a stalemate. It's great that the government have brought in a mediator to try and resolve the issue, because we all just want them to get on with it, don't we?
Yes,
we just want that rail link to the airport, like all of the international cities that we know have them. So good on the local councils for continuing to push this issue and continuing to let the government know how important this is to the local economy, but also much broader for Melbourne as well.
All right, Nick and Julie, take a break. We'll come back and talk about more stories in just a moment. We're heading to Rhys Thomas in a sec as well. But first, I do have a clarification and an apology to make. In a previous episode, we mentioned the case of Malad El-Halabi, who pleaded guilty to tampering with ballot material at the then Moreland Council election in 2020. In describing the case, I quoted from a VEC statement, which I note has been updated by the VEC this week to better reflect the sentencing remarks. My quoting was, I'll admit, just a little clumsy, and I do apologise to Mr. El-Halabi for my earlier statement. Now it's time to bring in Rhys Thomas for this week's snapshot and a look at some interesting local government issues. And a pleasure to welcome, as always, to the program, Rhys Thomas, who's been in the chilly climes of Canberra, but I'm sure is very happy to be back in the comparatively warm VLGA studio in Melbourne. Is that right, Rhys?
I am, although I should be calling it NAM this week, being NAIDOC week, and I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung here in central Melbourne.
Yeah, nice touch, nice touch. So how was the Canberra trip from your perspective?
It was really good. It's a really interesting dynamic, and I got an opportunity to catch up with some VLGA members, including our latest VLGA member, Indigo Shire, who've joined the VLGA just recently. So excellent. I got to catch up with the Mayor and CEO and some, and in fact visited Beechworth on the way home from Canberra, because I took the long way home by bus.
Any excuse to visit Beechworth, it's lovely, and the terrific team there at Indigo, I know them well, so great to have them in the fold as part of the VLGA. Now, I know you were keeping an eye on things back here while you were away, and one of the key events was the so-called swearing in, as the media reported, and I fell for this too, Rhys, of the Lord Mayor, Nicholas Rhys, but you're going to pick us up on the use of swearing in this particular instance.
I am, and I'm not sure it's a terrible error to make, but when I heard people referring to the swearing in of the Lord Mayor, I thought, does the Lord Mayor actually get sworn in? And in fact, do mayors actually get sworn in? So I had a bit of a look, because that's how my brain works. So I thought I might talk a little bit this morning about casual vacancies in the role of mayor and casual vacancies for councillors and how they work.
Yeah.
So most governance officers would probably be familiar with the process for filling a casual vacancy for a mayor at a council. It's pretty straightforward. It's simply an election in accordance with the council's governance rules. That needs to happen within a month of the council, of the mayor vacating the office, and then that elected mayor serves the remainder of the outgoing mayor's term. So that could be as short as a few weeks. It could be in fact, it could be up to nearly 2 years if the mayor has got a 2-year mayoral term in place. Now, the City of Melbourne is different, because the Lord Mayor at the City of Melbourne is directly elected. They're not elected by the council at all. So it's pretty important that that provision be retained. So when a Lord Mayor resigns with more than 6 months before an election, they have a by-election, and that elects a new Lord Mayor. Now, the City of Melbourne tell me that a by-election costs something like $1.3 million to conduct.
Wow.
The City of Melbourne. So there's obviously, that's not ideal. There's also an additional complication at the City of Melbourne, which is if one of the existing councillors or even the Deputy Lord Mayor nominates at that election and is successful, then a subsequent countback or by-election is required to fill the vacancy that creates and all the costs associated with that. So that happened in 2018 when Robert Doyle left. Councillor Leppert nominated for the office of Lord Mayor. Now, he was not successful, so there wasn't a need for a subsequent vacancy to be filled. Now, if there's less than 6 months to election, which is what happened recently when Councillor Capp resigned, the council effectively has two choices. The first one, which is what the council did, is to resolve that a by-election should not be conducted. In other words, let's not spend the $1.3 million for the short amount of time we have left. And what that does is that has the effect of automatically elevating the Deputy Mayor into the role of Lord Mayor. Right. So that's how Councillor Rhys has become the Lord Mayor. Now, the second option the council had was to resolve to ask the VEC to fill the vacancy with a by-election. Now, that's a bit complicated because there's an interrelationship between the City of Melbourne Act and the Local Government Act, which would have meant that in that situation, the VEC would have simply contacted the council and said, we don't have time. We can't elect you a new Lord Mayor before a period of 3 months, which is what's required before the council election. And in that situation, the Deputy Lord Mayor would have automatically become or held all the powers of Lord Mayor without actually formally holding the office. So what
so we would have effectively have become an acting Lord Mayor for that period of time.
So the City of Melbourne, when they appointed Councillor Rhys, really had two choices. They were choosing between appointing him as Lord Mayor or appointing him as acting Lord Mayor. But both of those situations would have come about as a consequence of its decision about whether or not to hold a by-election. They weren't actually voting for him to become mayor. So it's actually a bit of a pity, I think, because watching the meeting and knowing a little bit about the way the City of Melbourne works, Councillor Rhys has clearly got the confidence of his colleagues. He's clearly got the support of his council, and he's, by all accounts, I see no reason why he won't be an excellent leader up to the October election. But it's a bit of a shame that he never actually got to be elected as Lord Mayor. He sort of got the role by default.
So this so-called then swearing in, as it was described, was really a ceremonial robing process to sort of announce the new occupancy of the Lord Mayoralty?
Yeah, it was. So it's the City of Melbourne. So they did, like many councils do, they have a ceremonial process where he had the robes and the chains fitted to him and had an opportunity to address the meeting. So that was all good. And as far as I'm concerned, that's good enough for me. As far as I'm, I have no issue with calling that a swearing in. But he didn't actually take an oath or affirmation of office.
Right.
And in fact, that's interesting because that doesn't happen in any council that I'm aware of. The mayor never takes an oath or affirmation of office.
Separate to taking one to be a councillor.
Correct.
Yeah.
It made me think, well, maybe that would be something worthy of consideration. It's not in the Act, of course, but councils might want to consider putting something like that in their governance rules at some point, because when a mayor steps into a new role, a leadership role, their role does change a little bit, and there might be some value in something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So the ordinary, don't want to offend anyone, run-of-the-mill councillor casual vacancy, as you were intimating before, operates a little bit differently.
Yeah, it does. And so we've had a bunch of them this term. Well, I think we've had over 50, nearly 60 councillors leave office this term for a range of reasons. And those positions need to be filled. So the way it works depends a little bit on the electoral structure. So if it's a multi-member ward or an unsubdivided council, then the casual vacancies are filled by a count back. So they count the votes from the previous election. If it's a single member ward, or if a count back has failed, perhaps there weren't enough candidates, then a by-election is required. So in this term of council, we had 48 countbacks and 11 by-elections.
So Rhys, that means in the coming term, we've got a lot of councils moving to single-member ward structures for the first time. So we can expect, perhaps, if the same rate of attrition occurs, more by-elections as opposed to countbacks.
Look, we can. Let's see, I did work it out here.
Yeah.
There's 402 of Victoria's 650 councillors. So this is from the next election. Nearly 2/3 of all councillors will be serving in single member wards. At the moment, the number is less than half that. So if we see resignations at a sort of similar rate to what we saw last year, we'll probably see something like 4 times as many by-elections. We had 11, we might see as many as 40. So given that they cost significantly more, they also take 3 times as long. So the most recent countback in Moonee Valley was conducted 34 days after the vacancy. But the most recent by-election, which was in Greater Dandenong, took 110 days to fill the vacancy. So you've got that gap, and particularly in single member wards where many constituents feel a natural connection to the councillor that they elected in their ward, then that vacancy can cause can cause challenges for the constituency when trying to understand how best to approach their elected representatives.
It's interesting from a planning perspective, isn't it? Councils don't want to plan and expect that they're going to have to replace councillors during the 4-year term, but it's likely to happen in some of those cases. So as they plan their 4-year budget cycles and longer term financial planning, I guess you've got to factor in some of those potential costs. Rhys, would that be your advice?
It would be, but it is so very hard to do it. And there's another complicating factor, of course, which is that there's actually some income associated with elections, which is the fines for non-voting. We don't yet know. I haven't done an analysis to see whether people are more or less likely to vote in single-member wards versus multi-member wards. I suspect there's probably not a great deal of difference, except that single member wards tend to have less candidates on them. So if you're one of those people that, like many of us, puts your ballot paper on the fridge and says, at some point I'm going to do the right thing and research all these candidates, then if it's a really long list of candidates, that might be a bit more overwhelming and you may never come back to it and you forget.
Yeah.
So there's that complication as well. I don't know that councils can sensibly budget for the possibility of a by-election, but it's certainly worth considering, and it would have to be in the back of any finance officer's mind because the costs can be quite a lot.
A couple of other nuances just quickly as we're running out of time, Rhys, but from a community perspective, from a candidate perspective, there can be confusion too around those by-election versus countback processes, can't there?
Yeah, they can. And I think probably the most common question for a countback is people wonder why didn't the candidate who was the last one eliminated, why didn't the candidate who came fourth, say in a 3-member ward, why didn't they automatically get elected? Because often it isn't them. And the reason for that is because all the votes are counted again, and they simply pretend as though the councillor who has resigned and any other candidates who might have nominated and are no longer eligible, they pretend like their names were never on the ballot papers in the first place and just recount the votes.
Yeah.
That can actually produce an interesting quirk where one of the councillors who was elected and has not resigned could actually be eliminated in that count process. But of course, you don't go and tip them out of office. They get to remain councillors. So I'm not sure if that's ever happened. It doesn't have any legal consequence, but it might be a little bit embarrassing for a councillor to discover that in the recount that they don't no longer have the support of their community.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I don't know if you've looked at other jurisdictions much, Rhys, but I noticed recently there was a vacancy in a Western Australian council, and I see that under their legislation, which I think has undergone some reforms recently, there's an automatic elevation of the first and, if not available, second highest polling unsuccessful candidates in the most recent election, which would mean very little cost.
It certainly would. And that's not unlike the system that we used to have for countbacks, but we've never had that system for preferential voting.
Very interesting, as always, that little topic of Rhys led into those nuances of countbacks and by-elections. Before we let you go, big event coming up for the VLGA and for the sector next week.
Yeah, we're launching the Local Women Leading Change program. And in fact, not so much the program, but the handbook, because the program's well underway, which is a program the VLGA has been running almost since its inception in various different guises. The VLGA led the implementation of the Victorian Women's Charter back in '97, and a program called Agenda in 1998. Don't Get Mad, Get Elected in 2000, and Tap Her on the Shoulder in 2020. And so in 2024, we're again rolling out this Local Women Leading Change program, and we're delivering training to potential candidates right across Victoria, primarily women, of course. And the program supports women candidates and provides really practical advice, training and support to people who are wanting to stand to office. Things like how to do a campaign budget, safety on the campaign trail, advertising, how to tap into community networks, all of those sorts of things. We're pretty proud of that program, and we've been delivering it over many elections. Now, at this election, our project partners, Gender Lens Australia, so Tanya Kovac and Marie Overall from that organisation, have done a mountain of work here and are working with women across Victoria with a view to getting the parity, the 50-50 that we came so agonisingly close to back in 2020, and that we're hoping will be achieved in 2024.
Excellent. All right. So that event is happening next Friday, I think. Is that right?
It
The
is
19th? Yep.
at Richmond Town Hall on the 19th of July. Where better to do it than in the footsteps of Councillor Mary Rogers, who was Victoria's first woman councillor elected to Richmond Council. So anyone is welcome. You don't have to be a woman, but the program is targeted at women, and you can reserve your place on the VLGA website.
And all power to those efforts to get to gender parity at the upcoming elections. Victoria's come the closest, I think, of any state in Australia, and there's just a bit more to be done.
Yeah,
Thank you, Rhys.
Yeah, I think we're going to get there. Target 325. That's how many women we need to get elected.
Excellent.
And I think we'll make it.
Great, Rhys. Good, as always, to talk to you. Another busy week ahead at the VLGA, and we look forward to chatting with you again next week. Always something interesting that's coming out of Rhys Thomas's piece called Rhys on Rhys this week, because we were talking about Nicholas Rhys.
Yeah, very interesting, Chris. And, it's great to be able to reflect on some of these important topics in local government.
It is. And that by-election one for single-member wards could be a bit of a sleeper in the coming term of council. We've been alerted to an opinion piece that was published by Simon Kustenmacher of the Demographics Group. I've seen Simon speak. Very, very interesting presenter. Really does demographics so well in a way that can be accessed pretty much by anyone. This one, Julie, is describing local government as the forgotten career.
Yes, that was interesting. And I've watched this or looked at this piece with great interest, because the way that the piece opens up, Chris, is quite interesting. Local government is neither the most glamorous employment opportunity nor are workers showered in money, which I thought was an interesting way to start off the piece. Yeah, sure, it might not be glamorous employment, but it certainly is. And he goes on to say that there's some great opportunities in local government for people to work, and particularly because of some of the things that it offers. So it's interesting that he's saying that there's a group of people that we should be in local government targeting, because he recognises there are a shortage of skills and a shortage of people to do local government roles. Okay. So he's saying that there's this group out there that local government needs to tap into, and they're the millennial women. Okay, he calls them the millennial mums. Okay, so he's saying that there are this group of women that are in inner city, living in inner city, and they're moving out to the suburbs and out to the regions to have families. Okay, and they're looking for a workplace where it's really supportive of families, that it's really that it provides a lot of flexibility, and it's local to where they're living. So, they don't have to travel very far, and they've got this nice balance in their life. And so he's saying that they're looking for this kind of balance. And so he's saying that that's the group that local government should be targeting to bring in to councils to try and fill some of these much needed roles. And
he's even saying, and I doubt that many council HR people have thought about this. Put your ads in local mothers groups, childcare centres, to get to this cohort of people.
Yeah, he's saying get to them before they go onto social media, because he's saying that they use social media, LinkedIn and various other, Seek and all that kind of stuff to try and find jobs. He said get in a bit earlier than that and use different methods, as you say, to be able to attract them to local government. And look, I would say that there's definitely, I've seen, doing a lot of training for local government, I see a lot of new people into local government, and there are a lot of those millennials that are coming in, and they're talking about, how nice the environment, how nice the people are, and how nice the environment is to support them, in their early sort of career. And certainly, is supporting that, getting that gender balance across local government as well, which is fantastic. So look, a really, really interesting piece. I think that councils should read this piece. It's worthwhile understanding what could be done, and worthwhile recognising that there is particularly, a group of people out there. He is also saying that it doesn't have to be, it's not always females, because there's also a lot of men that are doing the parenting now, taking on that role, and they could also be, if they are taking on that core parenting role, that they could also be targeted as well. So he is sort of acknowledging that it's not just for women, that there are men that are taking on those primary carer roles as well. So more flexibility and more power and better access, I suppose, is what councils are able to offer these people.
Well, it's a matter also of thinking about, council does not have the ability to pay to attract people, so you've got to offer something else. The flexibility, work-life balance, etc., is something that councils are really good at offering. A number of the positions are fairly highly feminised already. Some are quite the opposite, but nonetheless. And the other thing that he picks up on, which I think is really useful and an attractor for local government, is the fact that there's a meaningfulness about engagement with the community that many tap into when they work in local government. And that is not something that can be offered in all possible workplaces. And for the generation that we're describing, this millennial generation that's coming through, that is an attractor in a way that it's less so for my generation, for example.
Yeah, they do want to make a difference. And I think that's the one thing that is really aligned with the values of local government. So, yeah, I'd agree, Nick.
Yeah, it's a thoughtful piece. And as you say, Julie, councils should have a look at that. It was published on indaily.com.au last Monday, if you want to check that out, from Simon Kustenmacher. I hope I'm saying that right. He did tell me how to say his name and I've forgotten. We're going to look at another story out of the UK about those council attempts to bring more balance and flexibility, which has been a bit controversial. But first up, perhaps don't focus too much on this one in your recruitments, the rising levels of abuse towards council staff and elected members. There's no week goes by without stories about this issue, but two that caught my eye this week, one in Tasmania, where two southern Tasmanian councils are taking measures to combat these issues that are causing, staff such concern that some of them leave by a different entrance to avoid confrontations with members of the public, and some staggering statistics that have come out of New Zealand, Nick.
Yes, look, it's very disturbing, Chris. People being called out in the street simply because they're perceived to be working at the council. And who would have thought that in southern Tasmania, and perhaps even more so in very sensible, down-to-earth, humble, easygoing Kiwi land, that this sort of thing would be happening. It's partly about the keyboard warrior culture or bent that a small minority has, but they do great damage. It's alarming that the story out of New Zealand says that the former Mayor of Nelson arrived at her home one day to find a stranger in a house with a nail gun.
Yeah, in a state of rage, it said. Yeah,
just incredible. So what can be done about this? Well, I don't have all the answers. You'll be surprised to hear. Obviously, there is employer support, because as any employer, there's an obligation to provide a safe workplace. So that's support, that's training, that's including training in de-escalation, which I think is a really sensible thing. Sad that we have to do that. I see that one of the councils has turned off its comments function on its website, which makes eminent sense. That's only going to partially solve the social media problem. But something much larger is required, I think, and I do not know what this is, to address the impact that social media has had, and perhaps coming on from social media, this perception or this thinking among some people that there's an entitlement on them to abuse people who are doing their jobs. That's something that I don't think we had 20, 30, 40 years ago. Has social media enabled that? I'm not sure, but there's a very serious issue to be addressed there. It's going to take a whole of society approach. It's going to take great leadership and insight, and I don't know what it is, but we need it. Otherwise, this will just continue and potentially get worse.
Might be able to help you there in just a moment. Julie, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm just really disturbed by all of this,
Mm.
and I just think it's so unfair that that the councillors and the staff get targeted in this particular way. You know, no employer would expect their staff to be treated in this way. You know, it's a lot of extreme response to, you know, to obviously issues that you know, people are not happy about. But you know, it's not the way to go about things, and it's
No.
just it's disappointing. It's just as disappointing to hear about it, and it does impact on the reputation of the sector. It does impact on people thinking about whether or not they want to run for council as a councillor, because they don't want to be abused. Let's just hope that, you know, that this continues to be just a marginal and small amount of this happening, and that it doesn't get any bigger than what it already is, because nobody deserves to be treated in this way.
Let's hope so, but it does appear that it is on the increase as
Yeah.
each day goes by. Your point, Nick, about, you know, did it start with social media? I've got a theory that it probably did and
Yeah.
has sort of been enabled from there. You look at those numbers from the New Zealand poll, 65% of elected members say they've faced online abuse, 39% abuse at community events, and 33% just as they're going about their everyday activities, you know, running errands, going to the supermarket, etc. So that those latter examples appear to be growing and being fed perhaps by this keyboard warrior stuff. But what I wanted to say to you both, and to anyone else who's interested and concerned about this issue, is don't forget our global summit that's coming up in October. I know it's still a little way off, but that's where we've got this host of global leaders from the UK, from the US, from Canada, from Australia, coming together to share strategies and tools for dealing with this issue. And, you know, basically Diane Kaelin-Sukra, who's the author of Save Your City, who's brought this event together from Canada, is saying enough's enough. We need to come together and find a way to tackle this toxicity and cultivate civility in our communities. So, bit of a plug, I know. VLGA is a supporter of that event on the 11th of October. And the address, if you want to find out more, is kaelinacademy.com/summit. So there you go. A plug for that summit coming up in October. Hopefully that can give people some answers, or at least some tools to use to tackle this issue.
Yeah, certainly.
Before we go, a couple of UK stories. The new government there is saying all the right things, Julie, about engaging with local government, and some of the mayors are describing it as a new dawn and saying what the PM's been saying is music to their ears. What we've seen this week is a gathering of mayors at 10 Downing Street with the PM and the Deputy PM. They're taking the words levelling up out of the government department name, so it'll just be housing and local government, I think, without levelling up. But they're really pushing this devolution process, more devolving of powers onto local government.
Yeah, they are, Chris, and I was expecting this was going to come, because they've been talking about this a lot prior to the election. And I think with the change of government over there, you know, this is their opportunity to be able to get in really early, and that's what they're doing. It's a bunch of regional mayors in England that have come together, and you know, got the ear of the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. And they're trying to reset the relationships between central government and regional governments, which is really good idea. And they're focusing on public service, respect and collaboration, which is really good. But they, you know, the early actions, as you say, to scale up devolution and empower regions to deliver change for their communities. So they're making it really clear that they want to continue with that power to deliver on what is required at a more local level. And they want to help to unlock economic growth and tackle regional inequality as well. So it's very much, from what I see, is the regional mayors or regional leaders that are leading on all of this, Chris. So interesting. The Prime Minister has stated that, you know, my fundamental belief is that those with skin in the game are the ones who know what they need best. That's why for many years I've been in constant dialogue with Metro mayors across the country about what works for their areas, and I will continue that now as Prime Minister. So Prime Minister Starmer has started well, and let's see what happens, Chris.
Well, of course, the funding thing is a bit silent there. The sector really needs a reset in terms of how it's funded, because we know so many councils are going to the brink of bankruptcy. So we'll wait and see what happens there. Any thoughts, Nick, before we move on?
Sure, just my one thought is that looking at the 12 mayors that came to Downing Street there, they're all mayors of major metropolitan areas. Now, some of those major metropolitan areas might be might be a bit bigger than Geelong, but we're talking places like Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, and so on. And those are all large metropolitan areas. And again, it's that size of local government area and thus the impact that they can do, because the devolution, they're talking about areas like not just employment, as Julie was referring to, but also transport and housing, which is less in the domain of local government in this country, but nonetheless really interesting, but also shows the size that you can do more with bigger local government areas. That's an inevitable conclusion, I think.
Another UK story we've been following is the 4-day workweek trial that was held at South Cambridge Shire Council. This was quite controversial, with the previous government demanding that they stop that trial. They resisted those demands and have kept it going while they wait to see what the attitude of the new government is towards it. And before that becomes clear, they've received some independent analysis of how well it's been working. And I think the figures are pretty positive, Nick.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting instance and trial. It's a 15-month trial, which is a good period of time. It would sort of be interesting to see what over the seriously medium term, 5-10 years, whether the results from this trial hold up. But of the 24 KPIs that were selected, 22 of those either improved or held stable over the trial period, while staff were working on a 4-day week. Now, they were still doing the same amount of work, but squeezing it into 4 days and getting the same pay. The most interesting thing, I think, given our earlier discussion, was that staff turnover reduced by 40%. 40%. And the optionality of having this 4-day week was a real attractor for people coming in. So they're attracting new people and showing off a benefit that they didn't previously have. The KPIs that came through with improvements included expedited approval processes. Other processes were sped up. Responsiveness to the local community was improved. All of those are really terrific things. The two areas where they declined, so of the 24, 2 declined, they were in rent collection and also how quickly housing was relet after it had been made vacant. And those two, the piece that I read, said are really attributable to other factors such as cost of living crises and so on. I think that's probably fair. So what's happened here was we've had an improvement in the quality of services that have been delivered. We've got happier staff. We've got perhaps a greater or better or both pool of staff, potential staff. And they've also demonstrated some fairly significant cost savings of £400,000 odd, which is a significant amount of money over the period. And given the funding crisis that local government's having in the UK, funds that they'll be very happy to have.
Yeah, I think a lot of that saving has come from being able to fill some traditionally hard to fill positions that they've obviously been paying above the odds for agency or temporary staff to fill. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
so yeah, good news there for that 4-day week concept, which is yet to really take off. But well done to South Cambridge Shire for leading the way on an innovative idea. Now, before we leave you, something a little amusing, I should say, that caught my eye. I just want to play you a little piece of this new ad for visiting Oslo in Norway, which they say breaks all the conventional rules of marketing. Take a look.
I wouldn't come here, to be honest. Oslo is just not, I mean, is it even a city? You know what I mean? Oslo feels more like a village, maybe. I mean, you walk around a corner and it's like, oh, there's the Prime Minister. And you walk around the next corner, it's like, oh, there's the King. Culture? I don't know. if you don't have to stand in line for at least a couple of hours, is it even worth seeing?
Not exactly the Mona Lisa.
I think a city should feel a little hard to get. It's like a good relationship, you know? It's not supposed to be easy.
That guy, the understated way that he inadvertently highlights
Oh.
the benefits of Oslo. That's a really clever piece, isn't it?
It is so smart. And if you get to watch the full YouTube video, watch it, because by the end of it, you want to go to Oslo. I can tell you, it's kind of like, let me go there, this guy is so dry, isn't he, in the way that he presents it. But, and at first you kind of think, oh boy, like, is he really criticizing Oslo? But he's not really. He's kind of telling you in a very dry way what's actually beneficial, in Oslo, what it has to offer. And look, they recognize that it's not a big city, like New York, and exciting like New York, but but it sort of plays to its strengths. So it's really smart.
Yeah. And incredibly successful. I mean, the fact that we're talking about this on this particular podcast shows just how successful it is. And, you've got to admire the marketing brains behind this. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Quirky stuff.
So anybody who's involved in tourism in local government, you've got to watch it.
Yeah, the EcoDev and tourism people that are working on their marketing campaigns, have a look at Visit Oslo. Easy to find. It's on YouTube. And also creativeblock with a Q.com has done a story on the sarcastic tourism ad that breaks every marketing rule, and it says it's perfect.
Perfect.
All right. Just a nice light one to finish on this week. We might have the other side of the coin next week to tell you about. I'll keep that up my sleeve just for now. But Julie and Nick, thank you as always. I hope you've got a great week ahead. And Nick, thank you for your appearances on the program for the last 5 or 6 weeks. It's felt like a lot longer. It's felt like you've been here forever.
I know. You're part of the family now, Nick. You're part of the family.
No, it's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. It's terrific. Great format. Good discussion.
Yeah,
lovely.
Hopefully we'll see you back again at some stage, filling in for Tony when he's off flitting somewhere else exotic.
Yes, we'd love to have you back. And of course, we better carve out some extra time next week to hear all about Tony's travels across Europe. All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again for TGU. And thanks for the team at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers for their sponsorship of the program. Have a great week, and we'll see you again for more TGU next week.